Okay, so now we come to the part of the show where we go through how you as spotters might get yourself up to speed on what is coming down the pipe, so to speak, forecast-wise, and seeing if you might need to be ready to report over the next few days. We'll go through how the normal outlook period should go and transition into the products that we typically issue days, hours, and even minutes before severe weather is near you. And the purpose for all of this is saving lives. We'll look at what we provide to keep you aware and where you can get the information. But then once you have the information, we'll look at what actions you can take to prepare yourself days ahead of time for incoming weather. Okay, so days out, what resources do you have to get yourself up to speed on incoming weather? You can use our hazardous weather outlook and the Storm Prediction Center's severe storm outlooks to give you an idea of what to expect. And this should prompt you to ask yourself some questions. Do you have a safety plan if power goes out or your house sustains damage? Do you have a shelter location in a basement, or is the innermost portion of your house secure enough? And finally, make sure you can continue to monitor the forecast daily, because as better sensing of forcing mechanisms occurs, the forecast can change. Here is one of the resources that we provide on our webpage, weather.gov/IWX/IWX Skywarn, that has real-time weather information on the left there, where you can click the link to go to Storm Prediction Center's page. We also have training and reference material where you can find online training from the MedEd organization as well as spotternetwork.org, as well as the report form and more information on reporting procedures on the right there, like the TELL method. Here's an example of a hazardous weather outlook that we issued for August 24th, 2016. Notice the day 2 through day 7 section highlights the chance for all hazards: wind, hail, flooding, and even some heavy rain leading to flooding. This is something that should trigger you to take note and monitor this period as it gets closer. And it should trigger you to think about your plans for that day period and about what safety precautions you might take. This section is the spotter information statement. Notice how it says that spotter activation may be needed for that period of interest. If we were to forget to change this statement and it still says spotter activation is not needed, we'd still want you to report any weather that is happening, especially if it's severe weather, and especially if you're seeing severe damage, regardless of how the section looks there. Severe weather itself happening should trigger your activation. So let's talk about the Storm Prediction Center. They do an outlook for severe weather out 7 days with less detail between day 4 and day 7. They get more detailed on day 2 and day 3, and then they get the most detailed as they get to day 1. Outlooks for the chances for severe weather are outlined between day 3 and day 1, generally dealing with the most intensity, area, and even confidence of severe weather happening as seen on this slide, with a high risk being for the more intense events like derechos and tornado outbreaks, all the way down to just garden variety storms producing hazards below severe weather thresholds like winds below 58 miles per hour and hail below 1 inch in diameter. Here's a day 4 outlook with 30% chance of severe weather happening across our area. Now on day 4, generally a 15% translates to a slight chance, and 30% translates to an enhanced or moderate chance of severe weather on day 3. And here you can see the jump to an enhanced risk for day 1. Notice that the 30% chance has shifted south slightly, indicating that the forecast has changed over even just a 1-day time period. Now on day 1 itself, SPC gets more detailed, looking for what percent chance of each hazard: wind, hail, and tornadoes. Generally 15% is about average for our wind area. Now here's the hail outlook for day 1. Notice a 30% area just grazes the southern portion of our forecast area, and even as a hatched area for a 10% or higher probability for significant severe events within 25 miles per hour of a point. Now, significant severe hail is hail reaching a diameter of 2 inches or larger. And finally, here's the tornado outlook. Generally, the average outlook for tornadoes for our area is about 2%, and a 5% is a little bit more elevated. But 10% illustrates an enhanced threat for tornadoes. Likely, the 10% was just outside the southern portion of our forecast area on this day. So now we'll go through what you might do with this information. As you look at the Hazardous Weather Outlook, HWO, or view SBC's severe weather outlooks, you might think about plans that you have for that day. Are you having or attending a party? Will you be watching your child at a baseball game? Will you be watching your favorite TV program? Does work have a meeting planned for that time period? Your safety plan should take into account where you are located during the time severe weather occurs and discuss what rooms can provide the most protection, or if anyone should just go to a nearby shelter. What about your emergency kit? Especially if you live in a mobile home or have your own storm shelter, a stocked emergency kit with food that will last a while, radios and other objects that can inform you of weather hazards even when the power's out, and medication are all important items to include. And finally, if you have canned goods in there, don't forget a can opener. Now we're just hours ahead of a severe weather event. During this time frame, if the ingredients in place are conducive for severe weather, generally a watch will be issued. So what should the issuance of a watch trigger in your mind? You might want to consider canceling or rescheduling outdoor events, especially if you have no place to shelter. You might monitor the weather closely for warnings. If you're outside, you might tune into your local news station or make sure your local weather radio is tuned to receive warning alarms. And finally, know your safety plan to be ready to move to a safe location if a warning is issued or if things begin to turn badly. Here are a few examples of watches we might issue hours ahead of severe weather with a severe thunderstorm watch, emphasizing the impacts from damaging wind gusts and large hail, but it doesn't rule out a tornado. A tornado watch, on the other hand, emphasizes the impacts from tornadoes, whether there will be a lot of tornadoes or just a few significant severe tornadoes, but also doesn't rule out damaging winds and large hail within its hashed area. We'll also issue a flash flood watch for water flowing over roadways and a rapid life or property threatening rise in water. So now we're just minutes away from severe weather hitting the area. It's now imminent or at least occurring nearby, hence the warning issuance. Now for a severe thunderstorm warning, we issue those for thunderstorms with the potential hazards of wind gusts 58 miles per hour or greater, as well as hail that is expected to be at least 1 inch or greater in diameter. But it can also have a tag for the potential for a tornado in that storm as well. For a tornado warning, we want to emphasize the signature on radar of rotation, or it could be a spotter that has observed the tornado. And finally, on this page, we note the possible issuance of a flash flood warning. We'll warn for an area of 6 inches or more of water flowing across roadways and a rapid rise in water that is a life-threatening or property-threatening problem. Again, watches are issued for when the ingredients are getting themselves together and the environment is becoming more conducive to severe weather, but a warning indicates that now storms have formed and are moving towards an area. So how can you get the warnings? You might go to a weather widget that the Weather Service has put together. You can access it by going to weather.gov/IWX/IWX-Skywarn and clicking on the real-time information link. This will bring up a few links down below, including the link for the NWS forecast widget. Here you can send a spotter report by clicking the yellow box, and you can access radar images as well as satellite images by clicking the links above the yellow box. Now how about NOAA weather radios? You might seek out when weather radio programming days are for help programming your radio for your location. Most radios come with instructions on how to program them and are pretty straightforward to follow. The best thing about weather radios is that they have a battery backup for power outages and they have tone alerts for warnings even when they aren't actively monitoring them. Okay, now what about safety? We want you to stay away from overpasses and bridges if you're outside of a car. They can act as a wind tunnel, sometimes slightly increasing winds inside the bridge itself, and can push those underneath into the walls and ceilings, creating problems for people. If you are inside a car and are stopped underneath them, that is one of the most dangerous things you can do because it means you're stopped in the road, and it can be a hazard for other traffic that may not be able to see you within blinding wind and rain. The best thing to do if you are in a car and cannot go anywhere else is to make sure your seatbelt is on and pull off to the side of the road away from oncoming traffic with your flashers on. As mentioned before, you'll want to plan ahead for your location that you are during the day when severe weather is approaching, and identify the safest location to be in during that severe weather, or identify a nearby safe shelter location. Above all, we want you to stay away from windows, which can be an open opportunity for debris to come in and harm those near those windows. When all of this works, it saves lives.